Hi, I'm Lisa Hanna, and welcome to Psychology Matters. Thank you for joining us today. Today our guest is Katie Jordan, author of We Carried the Mat. And thank you for being with us today, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So how did you arrive at the name of your book, We Carried the Mat?
Well, it's based on the Bible story about the four friends that wanted their paralyzed friend to get healed, but they couldn't get close enough to Jesus to do that. So they carried him on a mat, climbed a ladder, tore a hole in the roof, and lowered him to the feet of Jesus to be healed. So the book is based on those people that came alongside of myself and my husband Jay during his 2.5 years of fighting ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease.
And so why did you write the book?
Well, when we first got the diagnosis, Jay told me, Katie, you can cry now, but after that, there's not going to be any more tears. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be very good at that. And so I had been a journaler, and so at night after he went to bed, I poured out my feelings into journals, and I managed to fill 4 journals.
Wow.
And I thought that I was keeping it hidden from him, but about 3 months before he died, I had been searching the house because he was the writer in our family. And I thought he'd been writing his account, and I was going to do something with it. And I looked at him, I said, okay, where'd you put it? And he said, Katie, this is your story to tell. And so he kind of smiled, and he said, I know what you've been doing. And so I sat on it for about 5 years after he died before I did actually take the journal and turn it into our story.
Okay. And mainly to educate other families dealing with caretaking regarding terminal illnesses?
Well, I fought a lot with what was going to go in the book, and I went the avenue first of I want to impart all this information about caregiving. And instead, I wanted it to be more of I lived through this, so you can too. And the book is very honest and very real because it's actual, not all of it, but it is actual journal entries so that people can say, hey, I feel like that, and it's okay to feel like that because someone else did. So there are some resources in it, but it's more of a story and not a how-to guide.
I see. Okay. Would you like to, I was interested in the night angels. That was the question. I know I probably jumped ahead.
You did, but that's okay, because if I can kind of get to that
certainly.
point. I'm a physical therapist, retired now, and so when Jay was diagnosed, I was like, yes, I can do this. I can take care of him, because ALS is a disease that affects the nerves, and the muscles become paralyzed. So I had to do a lot of lifting and moving and making adaptations, and I was doing that very well. And we both have a very strong faith, and we would arrive at church every day, and it would take me about 2 hours to get him ready. And I would show up at church, and people would come up to him and say, man, we're praying for you, buddy. And they wouldn't even make eye contact with me. And so I got kind of angry about that, but I kept it to myself. And we went to church one day, and the pastor was preaching on this exact Bible verse or Bible story. And he was talking about, if you read the story, it does not say, by your faith or the paralyzed man's faith, it says, by the faith of his friends. They were healed. And he said, that's why it's so important to have a community. And he looked at us, and he asked me to bring Jay forward, because Jay was in a power chair and couldn't drive it. So I took him up to the front, and the pastor looked at me and nodded and told me to go sit down. And so I said to my son, he missed the whole point of his sermon. And my son said, you need to tell him. Well, the way I told him was I wrote him an email saying what I about did here. It was a great sermon, but you missed the point. And that was on a Sunday morning, and Monday the phone rang, and it was the pastor's wife asking me what they could do for me. And of course, I started crying.
Certainly.
And I said, I don't know. I just need so much. I can't even put Jay to bed anymore. And she said, well, I know people in high places. I'll get it ready. So they set out a call to the church. We went to a mega church, and we had all these people sign up to come into our home. And they came at night because we determined that was the worst time for me. I was exhausted. I could no longer lift him. And so these people, we didn't know any of them, started arriving. And for the last 15 months of his life, they showed up every night to help me put him to bed. Jay was a master. Everybody had to have a nickname. So he dubbed them the Night Angels.
Okay. What was your experience in dealing with the healthcare professionals during this time?
When, with ALS and with a lot of diseases, you end up needing a lot of extra equipment. Jay had, he had to be suctioned, he had oxygen, he had a feeding tube, he had a catheter. With each device that was added, the doctors would say, okay, you know how to do this. And I would say, no, I don't. Well, you're his caregiver. I'd say, but that doesn't mean that I know how to do this. And they would send me off without knowing how to operate any of the equipment. Some of the Night Angels did, and they trained me how to do it. So I got very frustrated. So a lot of advice I give to people is don't leave that doctor's office until someone shows you how to do it, and you show them back that you know how to do it.
Was there a certain event during this time that changed the course of your experience?
Yes. We lived, when Jay was diagnosed, we lived in a 2-story house with a sunken living room, a sunken sunroom. His office was in the basement. I could not leave him alone in the house because I would come home and find him on the ground. So we decided to build a house because we didn't know how long he was going to live. And so we built a handicap accessible home. But it was in a new neighborhood. And we were the first lot by the, I guess you call them retaining ponds or something like that. And so we got inundated with those little tiny frogs. And at first they were cute and they were just on the outside window, but then they started coming into the house. And I just remember one day losing it, totally losing it. I had a broom and I was swinging the broom at him and just crying and saying, get out of my house, get out of my house. And I realized then that I'd been trying to do all of this under my own power and that it was time to relinquish it and say I needed help. So I think that that in itself changed it, plus the sheer humor. I just kept thinking I was on a totally hidden video camera because my husband was sitting there in his chair just cracking up. And he said, Katie, you know, just stop. I couldn't. I could not. So I learned I was not self-sufficient during that.
So it certainly increased in your faith, for sure.
It did, and I was told one time when I told the story of the frogs, and when I was first writing the book, I wanted the book called It Must Have Been the Frogs. There's actually a chapter in there about it in more detail. And I was telling the story, and somebody told me that the acronym for FROGS stands for Fully Relying on God.
Wow.
And I said, yep.
Wow.
He had to send those frogs to me to make me realize that I wasn't relying on him. I was relying on my own power.
Absolutely. So in you and Jay's experience during this time, did he also, since he was a writer, assist in the journaling, or was it just your experiences?
He did not assist at all in my journaling because it was that secret. But Jay's personality completely changed. He went from this introvert to deciding he wanted to be a motivational speaker.
Oh, wow.
And we made it happen. It was not easy, but he did writing for those events.
Okay.
And he would tell his story through that. He spoke at church, he spoke at a recovery service, and his mission was, in ministry, was the jail. And we would go to the jail, and he would talk to the prisoners and say, I'm a prisoner in this chair, but look what I'm doing, because my life's not over. You know, you need to make something of your life.
Wow.
So he touched a lot of people, even from his wheelchair.
I'm sure he did. And so I'm reaching out to the jail in that situation. I'm sure the relationships there with the folks and how many people he actually touched and influenced. Do you know about that, or can you speak to that?
I think all of us say when a loved one gets diagnosed, this isn't fair, why me? You know, why would a loving God do this?
Mm-hmm.
And Jay's been dead almost 11 years now.
Okay.
So I've had time to really think about it. And I have, in my wisdom, have decided that Jay touched more people from his chair than he would have, and from his illness than he ever would have been able to had he stayed healthy. He was on a mission once he got diagnosed. And we had not only the night angels in our house, but he was a vet. And so we had VA personnel come in the morning and bathe him and dress him. And he'd ask him right away, "Are you a Christian?" And he would work on him. And he brought more people to Christ during that 2.5 years. But the holdout was a caregiver I paid who would be in our home and watch these people come in and out of our lives and pray for us and sing and do all this. And she was like, "I just don't get into that stuff." And Jay was constantly working on her. And we just couldn't figure out why he held on so long. And at his funeral, she came up to my best friend and I and said, "I want what you have."
Wow.
So we led her to Christ, but then I smacked her. I said, "Jay hung around to hear this, and I know he knows, but you waited, you know, a few days too long." So yeah, I really think that he just had a huge impact on people's lives.
Certainly. You mentioned some last wishes that, if you want to talk about that.
When we went into hospice very early because he had so many needs, and that's true with a lot of ALS patients. And when we did our intake, the social worker came and she looked at Jay, and she didn't know his sense of humor at the time, and she looked at him and she says, "Do you have any last wishes?" And he looked at her and he says, "You mean like Disney World?" And I wanted to hit him, but I didn't. And so it became kind of a private joke with us. And he would start out, and I think he planned it. And the first ones were real easy, like, "I want to go to a park and have a picnic." And then they got progressively harder. But his last wish, and he says, "I promise you this is my last wish." He said, "I want to fly in a jet fighter plane."
Oh.
Now, by this time, he was paralyzed from the neck down. And so I said, "I don't know about this one, but we'll start asking." And so anybody that came close to us, we would ask, "Do you know someone?" And one of the people that was not a night angel but had gotten super involved in her life was a pilot for one of the major airlines. And every time he stopped, he would go into the, whatever they call it, pilot locker room and bring it up. And he was in New York one time, and he said, "I have this friend." And he told the story, and this man, this pilot, said, "You're not going to believe this, but I have a jet fighter plane, and I hangar it 20 miles from where you live."
Oh, wow.
So he got to go in his plane. I had to duct tape him into the seat because he had no ability to control his head or his hands. The pilot's eyes were like this big, and he says, "You mean he could die up there?" And I said, "But he'll die happy." So when they landed, it was one of those with those hoods, you know, the planes that you lift up the hood, and the pilot came in and barely had stopped the plane, and he flipped the hood up, and he's screaming for help. And I go running out there, and for some reason I had scissors in my hand, and I jumped up on the wing of the plane, and Jay's head had fallen forward and had blocked his air, and he was blue. And I clipped the duct tape, and I pushed his head back, and he, you know, the air came in, and I looked at him and I said, "Well, how was it?" And he goes, he didn't go upside down." And I was like, oh my gosh. But that happened about 5 months before he died.
Okay.
So that was his final last wish.
Wow. God fulfilled.
Yes, he did. And we got it on video. It was amazing.
Oh, wonderful. I would love to see that. I would. How did you get any support during this caregiving process, emotionally, mentally, physically? How did you find your time to just rejuvenate and take some time off?
Anybody that tells a caregiver to go take a bath, all I want to do is go to the bathroom by myself, because my husband had this fear, and every time I had to go to the bathroom, I had to put him in his chair and take him with me because he was afraid of being alone. I had a very good friend. I was in a small group at church, and they were all praying for us, and some of them were helping physically, but I had this very dear friend that says, I can't help him, but I can help you. And she became my lifeline. She dragged me out of my house a couple times a week. We would go do yoga, we'd go shopping, we'd go out to eat. And she moved in with me 2 weeks before Jay died, and her husband very nicely let her do that, and he would bring us ice cream because that's all we wanted to eat. And she was the one that made all the calls that needed to be made. She was always the go-to person for anybody that wanted to help out, because people don't know what to do. They don't know what to say, they don't want to do, and I didn't answer the phone because I was too tired. So they would call Pamela, and Pamela had the list that I made. Katie could use this.
Oh, what a wonderful idea.
But we had people that just showed up. We had people that landscaped our new house.
Wow.
They mowed our yard. They'd show up with meals. They would just come and sit and talk with Jay, which was just a godsend to me. And most of the time I could not leave because he was very difficult to understand, and people were not comfortable, but just the fact that somebody else was doing it. And I had my church, and once the night angels and the pastor got involved, I had a lot of prayer support. I had one of the pastors just showed up all the time. He would serve Jay and I communion in our house. They were there. They were there for us. And then hospice, the chaplain at hospice would come over on a regular basis. And the other thing I did, which just now came to mind, is very angry, very frustrated. New house, no grass, lots of rocks. I would walk outside when I just needed a break, and I would start picking up rocks and throwing them. It cleared our property, but it also made me get enough control that I could go back in the house and be who I needed to be. And sometimes my son would come over, and I'd be out there, and he'd just stand there and throw the rocks with me. And we'd just stand there and throw rocks till I was ready to go back in.
Are there any other articles that you've written around this subject or your journey?
I've done 2 articles. The first one was published by ALS of Ohio, and it was on home modifications, because we made a lot of mistakes when we built our house. The builder we chose had never built a handicap accessible home, so we were all learning together.
Certainly.
So I learned enough that I wanted to impart what I had learned to other people. You know, if you're building, and it doesn't matter what your disability, there's some major things, like my husband could not get into the house because if you've ever, you know, a house being built, the land is all torn up. He was in a wheelchair. And, you know, the builders need to put something down so everybody can get into that house to see what's going on. So that was one article. The other one was on my journey through grief, and it ended up in a travel magazine of all places.
Wow.
I'm not sure how, but it did.
Maybe because there are a lot of individuals that are dealing with what we're talking about today. So that's wonderful ways to educate and raise awareness, and any research, all the research you've done, experience you've had to share with others going through this. Absolutely. Are there any more thoughts you'd like to share around the book that I have not, questions I've not
I have
asked?
a couple pet passions or peeves or something. 2 things. When you know that someone's going through this, don't ever call that person and say, if there's anything I can do, let me know. Because that person will never call you. You will never get the call. Make a suggestion. Offer to do something. Show up with something. Say, I bought you some groceries. If they have kids, I'm going to take your kids to the movies today. I'm going to mow your lawn. Don't say, if there's anything I need or you need. And the other thing is having those difficult discussions. I talk to people now that when I find out their spouse or someone's dying, I said, Do you know what their last wishes are? No, never asked. When are you going to do that? And so Jay and I had those discussions, and it was very hard for me to figure out how to do it. But what I ended up doing, because one of our pastor's favorite sayings was, we're all going to die. So one day we were sitting there, and I said, hey, Jay, we're all going to die. And I want you to know what my end-of-life wishes are. So I proceeded to tell him everything, and I said, it's your turn. And so then I constantly checked back with him over that 2.5 years, because I wanted to honor every wish that I could all the way till the end. And even when he was in a coma, I said, have you changed your mind? You know, have you changed your mind? He couldn't answer me, but I felt like I needed to do that because it was till death do us part, and I wanted to honor him that way.
Absolutely. And those are hard talks to have.
They're very
From my own experience with the caretaking of my mother. Retrospectively, we did not have those discussions, and I wish that we had. It was just too difficult for me at the time to ask those questions, but all the ones around finance, as well as spiritual support, as well as just what are your wishes?
And the best thing is, I tell people now, don't wait until someone's ill, because that's very hard to do. Do it now. Do it while everybody's healthy, and you can have this discussion and then just revisit it periodically and say, hey, have you changed your mind?
That's a good idea about revisiting, because I'm sure, I know things change a lot as you're going through those type of situations. Is there anything else I have missed asking? We have a few more minutes that you'd like to expound on.
One of the things, and I don't know.
Well, actually, we carried the mat. And where can we find your book?
You can find my book at Westbow Press or any bookstore. I know they carried it in Barnes & Noble.
Okay.
But I don't think the camera's close. If you can just keep that up.
Oh, certainly.
Everybody that entered our house, which was lots of people, I took their picture.
Okay.
Because I wanted, not only was I journaling, I was scrapbooking for my family's future. And if you look closely at that book, there are pictures. The front of the book is pictures. And my son and a dear friend of his took the pictures and combined them into the hands and the mat. So people look and they go, oh, they're really pictures of people. And
There
I said,
are.
yes, they are.
Absolutely. On bicycles, or having dinner, or there's a Superman in here. Who is the Superman?
That's Jay. He was captain aviator at the Dayton International Airport in
I'd love
Ohio.
to show that to the camera. That's amazing.
He would do crazy things.
Yes. Well, he certainly had a sense of humor. That's for sure. That's for sure. And I'm sure the friends and the Night Angels and the Helpers are certainly love to have their memories included in
And
the
I'm
book.
still friends. You know, your life changes when somebody dies. And these were the very people that could have walked out of my life because they had signed up to care for Jay, and now Jay was no longer alive. And they're the ones that are still in my life now, checking on me. Those couples that we were with, they walked out. They felt their season was over because I was no longer a couple. So I still am very, you know, I still talk to the Night Angels, the majority of them.
And so in that process of making new friends during this experience, what an amazing gift that is.
It was very hard at first that every night somebody came into our house that we'd never met before. And the funniest one, though, was I knew these people. They came in, and I thought Jay did too, because he was the sheriff. And he'd been the sheriff of our county forever. And we voted for him. And he came in, and he put his hands across, and he shook Jay's hand. He goes, hi, Jay, I'm Chuck Cox. And Jay looked at him and said, and what do you do? And Chuck looked at him and he says, well, I'm your sheriff. And it was just so funny because Jay went, oh, I'm so sorry. I voted for you. I really did. But so it was very hard to do that. And when we started out, it was just the women. They were all nurses because Jay had so many medical needs. And as he got harder and harder to manage, they started bringing their husbands. And the husbands were like, I can't do this. But they got into it, and they started helping. And so a couple months before Jay died, he said, he was always changing everything. He said, I've changed who I want to be my pallbearers.
Mm.
And I said, who do you want? He said, I want the night angels.
Mm.
He said, they've been lifting me for months. I want them to be the ones that lift me for the last time.
Wow.
So he was able to ask each one of them personally to do that. And they were all, most of them were on vacation because he died in June, and they all came home. That's how much he meant to
What
them.
an amazing story. Wow. Wow. Katie, any closing thoughts? We have just a few seconds. Anything you want to add?
No.
All
I
right.
think that,
Thank you for being with us today. What an amazing journey. The book, again, We Carried the Mat, and we can buy it again on
Westbow Press.
Westbow Press,
Barnes & Noble.
Barnes & Noble, and Amazon as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Thank you for being with us today on Psychology Matters. Please join us on Facebook or YouTube to leave us your comments and your ideas and thoughts about the show. Thank you for joining us.